Police are investigating a late-night rollover crash.
We're talking about blind people.
What we're going to discuss today on Into the Light is near-death experiences in the blind.
And they have a near-death experience, and they can tell you what they saw. They're still blind, okay? Give me a couple examples.
All right, here we are in phase 2 of evidence for the afterlife. We've talked about near-death experiences in another video. Please go check that out. We have out-of-body experiences included in that video. Now we're talking about near-death experiences, vision, quote, in the blind. And then we're going to move to shared death experiences and terminal lucidity, along with deathbed visions. Thank you for my new subscribers. Very much appreciated. First up, we got the case of Vicky. She's been blind from birth. She's had 2 near-death experiences. The second one was when she was riding home from singing at a bar. She got a ride with a drunk patron who got into a car accident and put her into a clinical death state for 4 minutes.
I was dead for 4 minutes.
She describes the situation as followed, quote, "It was very detailed." She said she had a skull fracture, concussion.
I had a skull fracture, concussion, neck injury, back injury, leg injury.
She said she had, quote, "a full-blown visual experience," and she was blind from birth. She describes being ejected from her car and coming out of her body, where her body was, quote, "a body of energy or light." Since Vicky is having a conscious experience and she describes her body as a light or energy, I think this is where science can come into play and help answer the questions. Some papers, biophotons, ultra-weak photons in the cell would be a good place to start. Cellular communication through light. The code of light. Do neurons generate light to communicate and repair? Evidence of photon emission from DNA in living systems. And photons, like consciousness. Biophotons, a hard problem. If science can figure out what the heck is going on with light, the photon, the biophoton within our bodies, which is described as infinite, timeless, non-local, and has quantum properties, then this has the potential to solve the hard problem, like in Vicky's situation. What happens to our consciousness after death? Other related papers to this subject are implications of biophotons to consciousness, emission of biophotons and neural activity in the brain, and consciousness, look at the light. We'll check these out in another video. Scientists who are exploring the near-death experience phenomenon or the recalled experience of death are already convinced that the evidence shows that there is a continuation of consciousness after clinical death.
So it's pretty well accepted now that these are common experiences that people have all the time and that have profound effects. There's still, of course, a lot of controversy about what causes them.
And think about it. So where we're at now today is we're in this gray zone of death. Science is exploring it. Why is it that in this state of disinhibition, not degeneration, in this state of gray zone of death, it's preparing us for this, what looks like a new reality? So, and what we also know clearly, when we die and we go beyond the threshold of death, neither biological processes die, nor the cognitive processes. Your consciousness is not annihilated when you go through death.
The question that remains is, for how long does this consciousness continue? Is it infinite? We can answer these questions by looking into the light. One of the leading scientists and researchers in this field is Dr. Jeffrey Long, MD. I've introduced him to you in some other videos. Check them out.
And so the first time Vicky saw herself, she had her consciousness above her physical body in the emergency room and saw her body on the gurney. She was frightened because vision was so outside of anything she ever knew.
I couldn't translate what it was that I was receiving, and it was scary. It was terrible initially.
And if you haven't seen the interview from Danny Jones with him, please go check that out after you watch this video.
The feel of a ring that her father had given her, which she'd only know by the sense of touch, now she could see it.
I touch things. My world is at arm's length. I perceive of everything tactily, and I couldn't translate what it was that I was receiving.
Dr. Jeffrey Long writes in Missouri Medicine in 2014, Near-Death Experiences, Evidence for the Reality. He says near-death experiences are reported by 17% of those who nearly die. His line of evidence number 1 is lucid organized experiences while conscious. comatose or clinically dead. He says it should not be possible for unconscious people to report highly lucid experiences that are clear and logically structured. Most near-death experiencers report supernatural consciousness at the time of their near-death experience.
I am a spine surgeon. I'm very calm, and I knew that I was about to drown. And at this point, I've been asked many times, well, did you feel yourself become unconscious? And I would say that I had been conscious and then more conscious.
His line of evidence number 2 is the out-of-body experience. OBE is apparent separation from consciousness from the body, like we just discussed with Vicky. 45% of near-death experiences report out-of-body experiences. They are apart, usually above their physical bodies, and they're witnessing their own resuscitation oftentimes. He discusses Dr. Janet Holden, who studied 89 case reports of the out-of-body experience, and she found that 92% were considered completely accurate.
92% accuracy in OBEs is certainly no hallucination.
Another case study he talks about was 287 out-of-body experiences, and found that 280, 97.6% of the OBE descriptions were entirely realistic.
This type of accuracy cannot be chalked off to just byproducts of a dying brain.
And his line of evidence number 3 is the subject that we're talking about today, near-death experiences in the blind, where he talks about Dr. Kenneth Ring, who studied 31 patients. And it says that 14 individuals were blind from birth, and 9 of them described vision during their experience.
I have never been accustomed to perceiving of anything from a distance, and I touch things. I
mentioned this one to you before, but back in 2022, 18 doctors and medical professionals got together and established the guidelines and standards for the study of death and the recalled experiences of death, a multidisciplinary consensus statement, and proposed future direction. What is interesting is they outlined 51 themes in relation to the recalled experience of death or the near-death experience. Today I'll give you the top 7: separation from the body, paradoxical lucidity, initial confusion, realization of having died, a sense of liberation and weightlessness. Visual awareness is number 6, observing the body and events from above. Number 7, a bird's eye view. I felt like I could see in all directions, 360 degrees.
Vicky's vision is described as 360-degree vision.
A leading researcher in this field is Dr. Kenneth Ring, Ph.D. He writes with Sharon Cooper, M.A. at the University of Connecticut, Near-Death and Out-of-Body Experiences in the Blind, a Study of Apparent Eyeless Vision. They state in their abstract what they're looking to accomplish, whether blind individuals have near-death experiences, and if so, whether they are the same or different as those of sighted persons. And number 2, whether blind persons were they ever made to see during NDEs or out-of-body experiences. If such claims are made, whether they can be corroborated by reference to independent evidence. Are you interested in the findings and the conclusions? Our findings reveal that blind persons, including those blind from birth, do report classic near-death experiences of the kind common to sighted persons. Our findings are unequivocal. Blind persons, even those blind from birth, recount experiences that clearly conform. They clearly conform to the classic near-death experience. They refer to these experiences, quote, a great preponderance that blind people claim to see during the near-death experience and out-of-body experience. So in their paper, they mess with the reader a little bit. During the conclusion, they act like, well, maybe we're just influenced by our desire to believe, or maybe we're taken into face value from a well-known physician. They allude to the fact of vision is fictitious, and then they say it is both true and false. So what the heck are they talking about? This is what they say. We learned that the story had so beguiled us into entertaining such an appealing possibility was fictitious. The fictitious that blind people can see. But by the end of our inquiry, we came to the understanding that this story was both simultaneously true and false. Simultaneously true and false. It was a fictitious story that turned out to be true. How can evidence of near-death experiences in the blind be both false and true? It is because blind people and regular near-death experiencers do not see per se with their eyes. They see with what we call transcendental awareness. Kenneth Ring and Sharon Cooper talk about transcendental awareness in their book Mindsight. You're seeing with the mind. They say that we appear to have here a distinct state of consciousness, which we call transcendental awareness. Transcendental awareness is a distinct state of consciousness and a mode of knowing in its own right, which is operative in the blind and sighted persons alike during the near-death experience. Let's transition now to the case of Brad Barrows, who in the winter, he was at the Boston Center for the Blind and came down with a severe case of pneumonia and had a near-death experience. He says that nurses reported that his heart stopped for 4 minutes and they had to perform CPR to revive him.
I had never known, nor have I known since, the idea of vision. As I was floating up beyond the roof, I knew that there was snow on the ground. In fact, it struck me that I could tell there was snow without even touching it.
He describes leaving his body, seeing his blind roommate, going up to the ceiling, past it, through the roof, and up, and describes a very detailed description of the snow.
I also saw a tram, a very plain, square-shaped tram with a sign indicating the direction this tram was headed. And I saw the tracks, which were carved out in the snow. And I found it peculiar that I knew it without ever touching or hearing it. I actually could tell a visual sense, as close as I could.
He said that everything happened so fast, all of a sudden I found myself inside of a tunnel that took me to a place with all-encompassing light. With my other video on near-death experiences and evidence for the afterlife and continuation of consciousness, we examined the data and evidence more from an objective perspective. When it comes to the subjective personal experience, Vicky understands that many people will not believe her account.
I do know that there are many people who are going to be skeptical and who don't understand and who don't believe what I say. But I know what I experienced, I know what I saw, I know what I heard, I know what I felt.
Charles Tart describes this in the foreword of the book Mindsight. He says, the general denial of any possible spiritual reality, though, and the active ignoring of evidence pointing towards the reality of some sort of spiritual aspect of humanity is scientism, not science.
And we've opened up a whole new vast and new frontier of scientific research. And so what it means is that we need to explore this question, and the idea that it's simply produced by the brain and therefore dies when the brain is dying or dies is clearly questionable and not correct, in my opinion. In death, as I said, paradoxically, people's consciousness does not start to wither away. If anything, it becomes released more vast and more powerful than it has been.
Aren't these visual experiences just dreams and visions?
But in my dreams, there is no light, no color, and there are no visual impressions.
The dream hypothesis fails because blind from birth people don't have visual dreams.
These experiences break the walls of conventional science down, and they open fissures in those walls, and we have to be...
You've even documented, as I recall, cases of people who are adamantly atheistic,
yes,
who then have the near-death experience.
The people that I've talked with who have described themselves as skeptics, as agnostics, or as atheists often have difficulty using religious terms afterward, but they know what they've experienced, and the term, which is almost a code word in a certain sense for this, is the light. They don't have any difficulty talking about the light.
In the case of Vicky, she described the near-death experience when she was younger. She was told that she must return, that her mother was crying, and that she had to be her mother herself. She was told that she would face many trials and hardships in this life, and she must overcome them. The most important thing and the key to life was learning to forgive and learning to love. She says this was the key to life. Now, the near-death experience evidences a dilemma to many, including Christians. They give the keys to life and death over to somebody else.
The devil? Everything is the devil to you, mama!
But we know who holds the keys.
I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and to Sheol, the afterlife.
In the case of Vicky, she describes meeting the one who holds the keys to life and death. Vicky describes meeting Jesus, where he sent her back. She says, "It is not time for you to enter my Father's house." And she describes him as being the most brilliant, the most beautiful, the most bright being of all.